Oh, interesting. How confident are you in your knowledge about the world? You might be wrong more often than you think. Why that is, we learned from Hans Rosling and his book Factfulness, and today we'll take a look at that. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung, and today I've got another book review for you. And today we're looking at Factfulness by Hans Rosling in cooperation with his son Ola Rosling and his son's wife Anna Rosling Rönnlund. The book starts with a couple of multiple choice questions. Allow me to ask one of those as an example. In the last 20 years, the proportion of the world population living in extreme poverty has A. almost doubled, B. remained about the same, or C. almost halved. What do you think? The correct answer is C. almost halved. However, if you chose an incorrect answer, you are in good company. Hans Rosling asked this question to 12,000 people in different countries, and most of them were wrong. For example, in Germany, only 6% of the people answered correctly. In the US, it was only 5%. In the UK, only 9%. So Hans Rosling said, well, I will go to the zoo and I will ask the... Not him. I will ask the chimpanzees. The chimpanzees don't even understand the question. However, if they just choose A, B or C at random, 33% of chimpanzees should end up with the correct answer. And 33% is considerably more than 5 or 6 or 9%. So the humans who did the questionnaire, they didn't just not know the answer and pick something at random. They consciously picked the incorrect answers. How can it be that our knowledge of the world is wrong to such an extent? Hans Rosling explains this by 10 instincts that lead us astray, 10 mental mistakes we make when viewing the world. The first of those is the gap instinct. We like to imagine two extremes that are far apart with a big gap in between. For example, we like to think of the world as divided into poor developing countries and rich developed countries. At this point, Hans Rosling shows a chart that shows the number of babies per woman and the child mortality rate, because those are good indicators for the standard of living in a country. Now, I could hold the page that has the chart into the camera, but that wouldn't look very good and that wouldn't be very helpful for you. But fortunately, we don't have to rely on that. Hans and Ola Rosling and Anna Rosling Rönnlund didn't just write this book, they also founded the Gapminder Foundation. And the Gapminder Foundation provides a lot of numbers and statistics on its website gapminder.org. So I can use this to show you the chart in full screen and color. Have a look. The vertical axis shows babies per woman. Further down means fewer babies. The horizontal axis shows child mortality. Further left means fewer children die. The colorful circles represent the different countries. The bigger a circle is, the higher that country's population. For example, the big circle here is China, and the very small circle are the Seychelles. The colors represent different regions, as you can see here. Green is North and South America, yellow is Europe and Russia, blue is Africa, red is Asia and Oceania. And as you can see, we really have a small cluster of rich developed countries and a big cluster of poor developing countries. However, you've probably noticed the big number in the background. This is the state from 1965. Allow me to forward to 2019. As you can see, the distribution has changed dramatically. The area in the middle that used to be a gap now contains the majority of the world population. As a replacement for those outdated categories of developed nations, developing nations, Hans Rosling proposes to distinguish between 4 income levels. Level 1 is extreme poverty. At this level, people have less than $2 per day. They might not have sufficient food, they might not have constant access to clean drinking water. Medical services are either not available or they can't afford them. 1 billion people worldwide live on level 1 today. On level 2, people have $2 to $8 per day. At this level, they have sufficient food, they can afford basic medical services, and the children go to school. They can afford shoes, they might have a bicycle or a gas stove or electric lighting. 3 billion people live on level 2 today. On level 3, people have $8 to $32 per day. At this level, they probably have running water indoors, even though it might be just cold. They probably have stable electricity, so they can have a fridge. They can afford a motorbike or another means of motorized transportation, and they can afford better education for their children. 2 billion people live on level 3 worldwide today. And finally, on level 4, people have more than $32 per day. Of course, they have hot and cold water indoors, they can afford a car, and they can travel by plane on vacation. But I don't need to tell you a lot about level 4, because if you are watching this, you probably are on level 4 and you know your own standard of living. If we are on level 4, $3 more or less don't make a huge difference for us. So it's difficult to imagine what a big difference it is to live on level 2 and not on level instead of level 1. Today, 1 billion people worldwide are on level 4. The majority of the world population, 5 billion total, are on level 2 and level 3, which is a standard of living that is similar to what we had in Western Europe and North America in around 1950. When we read the book, at first this is all just fun facts and general education for us. However, those information is crucial when it comes to making political or economical decisions. Imagine a big company that's making some basic everyday goods such as menstrual pads or toothbrushes. If all the decision makers still stick to the old developed countries worldview, they will probably see that 1 billion people on level 4 as their only viable market. However, there are 5 billion people on level 2 and 3 that are quite interested in buying just basic menstrual pads and toothbrushes at an affordable price. I've been talking for a while about the gap instinct and some basics now. The other 9 instincts I will go through more quickly, so the video doesn't go on endlessly. Instinct number 2 is the negativity instinct. When I asked you about the question about poverty, did you say it doubled? Because we tend to believe that things are getting worse, even though they seldom are. Typical example for that is the crime rate in the USA. For the last 30 years, the crime rate decreased almost every year. However, in polls, when people are asked, do you think there is more crime today than in the past or less crime? Almost every year, more than 50% of the people say more crime. Instinct number 3 is the straight line instinct. If we look at a chart and there is an increase or a decrease, we expect this to continue in a straight line. However, there are several different types of charts and quite often there is no straight line. The most important example in this chapter is the increase in the world population. In the last 100 years, we had a quite a big increase in world population, and a lot of people are afraid this increase will continue like this and the population will just grow and grow until we face severe problems from overpopulation. The topic has even appeared in popular culture. Think, for example, of Dan Brown's Inferno, the book and the movie, or one of the Avengers movies, or the Kingsman movie. In all of those, there was a supervillain who wanted to severely decimate the world population in order to rescue mankind from going extinct due to overpopulation. Actually, however, the increase in population has already we are already past the peak. Do you remember the chart I showed you with the number of babies per woman? Did you see how all the bubbles move downwards? In 1965, on average, a woman had 5 children. In 2017, this had decreased to 2.5 children. So the rate of birth has gone down. We have 2 billion children today, and the UN expects there to be still 2 billion children in 2100. The population will still increase in the coming decades, but not because there are more children. Currently, the age groups form a kind of pyramid. We have 2 billion children at the bottom, we have less young adults, even less older adults, and so on. So kind of a pyramid shape. Now, if the 2 billion children of today grow up to become adults, and the same number, and they are replaced by the same number of new children, then this will move upwards to form a kind of tower or something like that. So in the coming decades, the population will increase, but we won't have more children, we will have more adults. According to current predictions, the world population will grow to 10 or 11 billion people, but then the growth will stop and it won't increase anymore. Instinct number 4 and 5 I will deal with together since they are similar. Instinct number 4 is the fear instinct. We tend to pay a lot of attention to things that are frightening, that involve danger and risk and that make us afraid, even if there is very little actual danger behind them. And the size instinct means that we are easily impressed by a lonesome number or a single event, even if those aren't that significant anymore when put into proportions, put into context, for example, by comparing a number with another relevant number. It is October 17th, 2004. We are in Sweden. Marie Larsson, 38 years old, mother of 3, is murdered. Her former partner has broken into her house and waited for her there, and when she came home, he hit her head repeatedly with an axe. At the same day, Johan Westerlund, 40 years old, father of 3, is attacked and killed by a bear on a hunting trip. Now, the question is, which of those events was featured heavily in the media, in the news, and which one was barely mentioned? A human being killed by a bear. That happened, the last time that happened in Sweden was 1902. This is a once-in-a-century event. A woman is killed by her partner every 30 days. Now imagine you're a journalist. You can't write the same article each month. Another woman killed by domestic violence. Your readers would get bored of that quite quickly. However, this doesn't change the fact that being killed due to domestic violence is 1,300 times more likely than being killed by a bear. Hans Rosling doesn't elaborate on that, but I'm pretty sure at the time there were several Swedes who said, "Oh, I better not take this, my usual walk through the woods on Sunday, so the bear doesn't get me as well," or who cancelled their camping vacation, or who suddenly felt uneasy living close to the forest. And there probably were some who said, "Oh, we have to do something before those bears wipe us all out." Now, you really don't need to be afraid of a bear attack, because that is one of the most unlikely causes of death at all. And the same is true for natural disasters. Natural disasters account for 0.1% of the death each year. Plane crashes account for 0.001%. Murder for 0.7%. Nuclear leaks for 0%. Terrorism for 0.05%. However, if you watch the news, if you have a look at the media, they paint quite a different picture. So it's quite important to remember to put things into perspective, for example, by comparing the death from the people killed by beer attacks to the people killed due to domestic violence. I will also combine instincts 6 and 7. Those are the generalization instinct and the destiny instinct. We like to generalize, and we are blind to steady, slow change over a long time. And yeah, those instincts this is where a lot of stereotypes and prejudice come in. The kind of, oh, you know those people, you know how they are. They are all the same and they don't ever change, and that's why they won't make any progress. We tend to emphasize cultural and religious differences. For example, a lot of people believe that in other religions people get a lot more children than Christian people. We have a chart for that. The vertical axis again shows babies per woman, the further down the fewer babies. The horizontal axis this time shows income, the further right the higher the country's income. The colorful circles again represent countries. The bigger the circle, the higher the country's population. The colors this time do not represent regions, but religions. Blue are Christian countries, green are Muslim, red are Eastern religions. And as you can see, they are pretty evenly distributed. There are Christian countries with a lot of babies per woman, and there are Muslim and Eastern religion countries with few babies per woman. However, there is a strong correlation between babies per woman and income. The higher a country's income is, the fewer babies per woman there seem to be. Now, this is quite a common problem. A lot of differences we attribute to culture or religion are actually differences in income levels. And there is quite a fascinating service provided by Gapminder.org, which is Dollar Street. At Dollar Street, you can have a look at how people on different income levels around the world live by having a look at photographs. Let me show you an example. Here I've got 8 different bedrooms from families around the world who have between $900 and $1,100 per month available. One of those is from the USA and one is from the United Kingdom. Can you guess which those are? The others are from Brazil, Cambodia, there are 2 from India, 1 from Mexico, 1 from Nepal. Alright, I'll show the country labels. Did you pick the right ones? I really recommend to have a look at Gapminder.org and Dollar Street. I find them quite interesting and fascinating and enlightening. Instinct number 8 is the single perspective instinct. We like simple explanations, and we tend to look for simple explanations, especially ones that confirm our worldview, that confirm our ideologies. However, there rarely is a simple solution, a simple explanation, and ideologies are rarely the solution. In this chapter, Hans Rosling describes the situation in Cuba, where government regulation, due to government regulation, people have a good level of health. People are healthy, but they live in poverty. and he describes in comparison the situation in the United States, which has the highest spending on medical services, on health services of all countries, but still is surpassed by 39 other countries when it comes to life expectancy. Instinct number 9 is the blame instinct. We like to look for a scapegoat and blame all the problems on him rather than searching for the actual explanation and the actual causes. In 2015, 4,000 refugees drowned in the Mediterranean Sea while trying to reach Europe in inflatable boats. You might still remember shocking images of dead children washed ashore on European beaches. And the villain who caused this tragedy was quickly found. It was smugglers who tricked poor refugees into handing over large sums of money for this passage to Europe in death traps of inflatable boats. However, Hans Rosling wondered, why didn't those refugees take a plane or a proper ship? After all the European countries are signed up to the Geneva Convention, so refugees from war have a right to asylum. Well, there is a European Council directive from 2001 regarding illegal immigrants. If an airline or a shipping line brings illegal immigrants into a country, they have to take them back at their own cost. Now, obviously, this directive says it doesn't apply to legitimate asylum seekers. It only applies to illegal immigrants. However, in reality, this doesn't really matter because the person at the check-in counter can distinguish within a few seconds between an illegal immigrant and a legitimate refugee seeking asylum. This takes an embassy several months. So bottom line is, commercial airlines and shipping lines won't let anyone on board who doesn't have a visa. And as you can probably imagine, it was quite impossible to get a visa at this time because the European embassies in Libya and Turkey didn't have the resources to process all these applications they got. So no plane, no ship. Well, you could say, all right, but those smugglers, at least they could have used proper ships that wouldn't sink during the voyage. Yeah, well, there is another European Union policy that states that all ships are confiscated on arrival. So you have to use a single-use ship or boat, and yeah, that's an inflatable boat. Instinct number 10, the final one, is the urgency instinct. If things appear to be urgent, we tend to make hasty and bad decisions. Now, this chapter also deals with the problem that people who want to raise awareness and activists tend to create a sense of urgency because they find it necessary to get people to pay attention and to get people to realize it's important. Hans Rosling was involved in the fight against Ebola in African countries. And when he joined the fight, there were only statistics that counted suspected cases of Ebola. And these statistics, they went straight up. They increased at an alarming rate. Now, one of the first things Hans Rosling did was he collected data from the different laboratories and combined it, and he created a statistic of confirmed cases of Ebola. And when he had finished that, he noticed that Ebola had the confirmed cases of Ebola had reached a peak a few weeks before, and after that the number of cases had been declining. And of course, this realization was now for the people in Africa who were fighting Ebola, it was great to see that their efforts actually had an effect that they were winning, and that the worst had passed, and things were getting better. However, the organizations that dealt with Ebola, in their publications, they still used the statistics that showed the suspected cases that went straight up, and where the situation seemed to get still seemed to get worse, because they thought if they told everyone, oh well, the worst has passed, things are getting better, they would lose interest. And they would lose their support. In the book's final chapter, is about factfulness in practice, in business, for journalists, politicians, and activists, and for your own organization. Now, I have to admit, when I started reading the book, I was pretty clueless, just as the people who did Hans Rosling's questionnaire. Now, obviously, if you buy a book that is called Factfulness and the cover says 10 reasons we're wrong about the world, you might suspect those questions in the introduction will probably not turn out as you expect. However, if I had encountered them in a neutral place, I would have answered most of them incorrectly, and the chimpanzees would probably have laughed about me. So I learned a lot from this book, and I'm glad I read it. And it was also quite enjoyable. For one, it's a very positive book, since you learn a lot of things that are nice and positive and optimistic. As it says, the world is better than we think. And on the other hand, it is quite well written. Hans Rosling traveled a lot and visited a lot of countries and did a lot of work, and he tells several interesting and exciting experiences from his life, and also the examples he uses are well chosen and well described. And yeah, the book is fun and quite enjoyable to read. And I also like this topic of mental mistakes we make, of situation where some mechanism of our brain is leading us astray. There are also some books by Rolf Dobelli who deal with such topics, and also in Thinking Fast and Slow from Daniel Kahneman. This is also an important aspect. We might look at some of those books later on, by the way. So I can really recommend this book. It's a great book. Have a look at it. Oh, and also have a look at gapminder.org and Dollar Street. I really find them quite fascinating and surprising and interesting. Of course, I will provide links to those in the video description, and I will also provide a link to a TED Talk with Hans Rosling that is pretty cool as well. Did you maybe read the book, or are you interested in reading the book? Let me know your opinion about it in the comments. And while you read it, maybe click the like button and subscribe to the channel. We will see each other next week in the next channel update. Until then, I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.